Closure is often something we chase like it is the missing piece to a puzzle we desperately want to complete. But sometimes the puzzle is meant to remain unfinished. There are people in our lives who, no matter how much effort we put into understanding or reconnecting, will never meet us halfway. The absence of reconciliation can feel like a wound that refuses to heal, yet healing is not dependent on their return. It is something we must create within ourselves, even when the other person is absent from the process. Closure, in this sense, is not given. It is chosen. The expectation that every relationship will resolve neatly often comes from the stories we absorb as children, the narratives where conflicts end with hugs, forgiveness, and happily ever after. But life is rarely so tidy, and real human dynamics are layered with complexities that resist such simple conclusions. Waiting for reconciliation to happen can trap us in a cycle of hope and disappointment. We find ourselves frozen in time, unable to move forward, because we are waiting on someone else's decision. Recognizing that peace can exist even without that final conversation is where freedom begins. When we hold on too tightly to the need for reconciliation, we unintentionally hand our power over to someone else. We let their silence dictate our healing and their unwillingness shape our future. This dependency creates resentment because deep down we know our lives are too valuable to be tethered to another person's choices. To reclaim our strength, we must redefine closure not as something they can give, but as something we can decide to create. This shift in perspective is the first act of courage toward inner peace. The reality is, closure often comes from accepting the unanswered questions. It comes from learning to live without the apology we may feel entitled to, without the explanations we may crave, and without the justice we think we deserve. Accepting these absences is difficult because it requires us to lean into vulnerability and admit that we cannot control the hearts of others. Yet in that vulnerability lies a surprising strength because it teaches us that we can still live fully even when reconciliation never comes. That acceptance is not weakness, but resilience. We must also confront the truth that reconciliation, even if it were to happen, might not actually bring the peace we imagine. The fantasy of reconciliation often paints a picture of healing that may not align with reality. A forced apology might feel empty, a reluctant reunion might stir up more pain than relief, and sometimes the past simply cannot be restored to what it once was. By letting go of the illusion that reconciliation will fix everything, we allow ourselves to embrace a more authentic path to healing. The peace we cultivate internally becomes more sustainable than any temporary resolution. Learning to live without reconciliation also sharpens our sense of boundaries. It helps us see that not every relationship deserves to be resurrected, and not every person has earned the right to sit at our table again. This clarity may feel harsh at first, but it is profoundly liberating. Boundaries protect us from reopening old wounds and remind us that it is okay to walk away from people who repeatedly choose harm over accountability. In honoring those boundaries, we are not shutting others out. We are simply choosing ourselves. The journey toward peace without reconciliation also calls us to practice compassion, both for ourselves and for those who hurt us. Compassion does not excuse their behavior, but it helps us release the heavy armor of bitterness. When we choose compassion, we stop rehearsing the pain over and over in our minds and instead allow space for new experiences of joy. Compassion tells us that we don't have to carry their mistakes as part of our identity, and we don't have to let their actions define the way we live. In this way, compassion becomes a tool for freedom rather than reconciliation. Healing belongs to you, and one of the hardest truths to accept is that the people who hurt us may never acknowledge the depth of the damage they caused. We often spend years waiting for the words, "I'm sorry," as if they hold the key to our freedom. But what if those words never arrive? When our healing depends on the choices of others, we give them power over our story long after they've left it. True healing begins when we reclaim that power and decide that our growth is not contingent on their apology. The ownership of healing is a choice only we can make. Waiting for accountability from someone who has no intention of giving, it keeps us tied to their actions. It is like standing at a locked door, rattling the handle, convinced that persistence will open it. But some doors will never open, and standing in front of them only robs us of time and energy that could be used to build something new. By stepping away, we send a message to ourselves that our future matters more than their silence. Healing is about walking toward what restores us instead of clinging to what breaks us. When we choose to take responsibility for our healing, we allow ourselves to see pain differently. It is no longer a prison we wait to be released from. It becomes a teacher that strengthens and refines us. We begin to notice how much energy we've wasted replaying old conversations, imagining different endings, or waiting for someone else to validate our feelings. Releasing that need creates space for self-trust because we stop seeking external confirmation that our pain was real. We affirm it ourselves and find the courage to rise above it. Taking ownership of healing doesn't mean pretending we aren't hurt, and it doesn't mean rushing the process. It means sitting with the reality of what happened and choosing to move through it on our own terms. This choice can feel lonely because it demands that we stop expecting the person who caused the wound to also be the one to close it. But in that loneliness, we find strength because we discover we are capable of carrying ourselves forward. That moment of self-reliance becomes the seed of resilience. One of the most empowering shifts comes when we realize that closure is something we can create without their participation. We can write letters we never send, speak the words we never got to say, or release emotions through rituals that mark an ending in our own way. These acts may seem small, but they are powerful reminders that healing is not passive, it is active, intentional, and within our control. We do not need permission to let go, and we do not need validation to move on. We are enough to give ourselves both. It is also important to recognize that owning our healing does not mean excusing the harm that was done. We do not minimize our pain or rewrite history to make it easier to bear. Instead, we honor our truth and carry it with dignity, refusing to let it define the rest of our lives. By holding both the reality of the wound and the determination to heal, we build a deeper sense of self-worth. That worth becomes our compass, guiding us away from cycles of blame and toward choices that nurture our growth. Healing that belongs to us also allows us to engage with others differently. When we stop waiting for one person's acknowledgement, we open ourselves up to receive love and support from other places. Friends, mentors, or even our own inner voice can provide the affirmation we long for. This shift teaches us that our lives are not bound by one story or one relationship. Instead, they are shaped by the countless ways we choose to show up for ourselves and allow others to show up for us. Through this, we discover that healing is not about them, it is about us. Letting go of the fantasy of reconciliation is one of the most difficult but necessary steps in creating inner peace. Our minds love to cling to imagined scenarios where the person finally understands, apologizes, and repairs what was broken. These daydreams feel comforting because they offer hope, but they also keep us trapped in a loop of longing and disappointment. Every time reality fails to match the fantasy, the pain resurfaces with fresh intensity. Breaking free requires courage to face life as it is, not as we wish it to be. The fantasy of reconciliation often carries with it an illusion of justice. We convince ourselves that peace will only arrive when fairness is restored, when the scales are balanced by their acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Yet the truth is that life does not always grant such neat resolution, and justice may never come in the form we imagine. Waiting for that moment keeps us standing still, unable to create our own healing. Accepting that we may never hear the words we crave is painful, but it is also liberating. It allows us to choose freedom now rather than wait for an uncertain future. One of the hidden dangers of holding onto the fantasy is that it binds us to the past. Our minds become stuck in replay mode, running through old conversations and envisioning new ones that will never take place. This cycle consumes our emotional energy and prevents us from investing fully in the present. The more we rehearse the story, the deeper it embeds itself in our sense of self. Letting go is not about erasing the past, but about releasing its power to dictate our future. When we finally loosen our grip on the fantasy, we make room for reality, however imperfect it may be. Reality might mean accepting that the relationship is over, that trust is beyond repair, or that closure will not come from the other person. Though painful, reality is also grounding because it gives us something solid to work with. We can build from what is real, but we cannot build from illusions. This shift transforms us from passive dreamers into active participants in our own healing. Letting go of the fantasy also invites us to redefine what healing looks like. Instead of waiting for someone else to give us peace, we learn to create rituals, practices, and habits that restore us. Journaling, therapy, prayer, or simply talking with safe people can become ways to process what we've lost. These practices remind us that we do not need the other person's involvement to feel whole again. We are capable of building peace with the tools we already have. Another important aspect of releasing the fantasy is learning to sit with discomfort. Our brains crave resolution, and the absence of it can feel like an open wound. But over time, we learn that peace is not the same as perfect closure. Peace is the ability to live well, even with unanswered questions. By accepting that discomfort is part of the human experience, we remove the pressure for everything to end neatly. This acceptance strengthens our ability to navigate future losses with resilience. Releasing the fantasy does not mean denying our longing for things to be different. It means acknowledging that longing while also choosing not to be controlled by it. We can honor the desire for reconciliation while also recognizing it may never happen. This balanced perspective allows us to grieve the relationship honestly without being consumed by false hope. In that space, we begin to see that letting go is not giving up. It is an act of self-compassion. It frees us to focus on the life we are creating rather than the one that never materialized. Forgiveness in situations where reconciliation will never happen is not a gift we hand over to the person who caused the hurt. It is a release we grant ourselves. Carrying resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person suffers, when in reality, we are the ones who continue to ache. Forgiveness in this sense is not about saying what they did was acceptable. It is about deciding that their choices will no longer dominate our emotions. It is the act of reclaiming our energy and refusing to live as a prisoner of old wounds. By forgiving, we allow ourselves to breathe again. Many people resist forgiveness because they believe it excuses the harm or erases the injustice of what happened. But forgiveness does not deny the truth. It acknowledges it fully and still chooses freedom over bitterness. When we cling to anger, we create a cycle where the wound defines us more than the healing does. Forgiveness becomes the doorway through which we step out of that cycle and into a space of renewal. It honors the pain without allowing it to dictate our future. In that sense, forgiveness is an act of strength, not surrender. The process of forgiveness is rarely quick or easy, and it cannot be forced. It is something we grow into as we begin to realize the cost of carrying hatred is too heavy for our souls. Sometimes it begins with small shifts, like no longer rehearsing the story in our minds every night or choosing to stop wishing for their suffering. Over time, these decisions add up, and forgiveness starts to feel less like an impossible burden and more like a gentle release. It is a journey that unfolds layer by layer as we continue to practice compassion toward ourselves. Forgiveness does not require contact with the other person, and it does not depend on their apology. In fact, sometimes the healthiest forgiveness happens in silence. without them ever knowing. It may take the form of writing a letter we never send, speaking the words aloud to ourselves, or symbolically letting go through ritual. These practices give us a sense of closure even when reconciliation is absent. They remind us that forgiveness is a private act of liberation, not a public declaration of reconciliation. When we choose forgiveness, we are not letting the other person back into our lives unless we decide it is safe and right. Forgiveness and boundaries must walk hand in hand, because to forgive does not mean to allow repeated harm. It means acknowledging the hurt while also affirming our worth by protecting ourselves. Boundaries ensure that our healing remains intact, while forgiveness ensures that our hearts are not hardened. Together, they create a balance of freedom and self-respect. This combination is what allows us to move forward with dignity. One of the greatest gifts of forgiveness is that it restores our capacity for joy. Anger and bitterness are heavy companions that cloud our vision and steal moments of peace. When we release them, we create space for gratitude, laughter, and connection to return. Forgiveness clears the emotional clutter that prevents us from fully engaging with the present. By lightening our load, we make room for new experiences and relationships that are not shadowed by past pain. This renewal is a reminder that life can still be beautiful after loss. At its core, forgiveness is about reclaiming power. It is choosing not to let the actions of others determine the quality of our lives any longer. It is a declaration that our spirit is stronger than the wounds inflicted upon us. While reconciliation may remain impossible, forgiveness ensures that we do not carry the weight of someone else's choices forever. It is our way of saying, you may have written a painful chapter in my story, but you will not write the ending. That truth alone allows us to step into freedom with courage. Strength is often misunderstood as the ability to hold on tightly, to never let go no matter how much it hurts. We are taught that perseverance means clinging to relationships even when they are broken beyond repair. But real strength is measured by our willingness to release what cannot be fixed, to surrender the illusion of control and accept what is true. It takes far more courage to loosen our grip than to cling to false hope. Strength is not endurance of pain for its own sake, but the vulnerability to say, this chapter is over. Vulnerability is at the heart of true strength because it requires us to face reality without hiding behind defenses. To admit that reconciliation is impossible feels like failure, but in truth, it is an act of honesty. Pretending we are fine while secretly aching only keeps us stuck in denial. Strength shows itself when we stand in the open with our pain, refusing to disguise it, but also refusing to let it rule us. It is in that moment of authenticity that we reclaim the power to move forward. Letting go does not mean forgetting what happened or dismissing its impact. It means choosing to no longer carry the weight of a story that cannot change. Every ounce of energy spent holding on to resentment is energy taken away from building a future. Strength is the choice to redirect that energy toward healing, growth, and love. By releasing the past, we are not losing. It is, in fact, the greatest victory over what once held us captive. There is a misconception that strength is loud, forceful, and unyielding, but often it is quiet, steady, and gentle. It looks like taking a deep breath instead of sending the angry message, like walking away from an argument we know will go nowhere. It looks like softening our hearts toward ourselves when shame tells us we should be tougher. Strength is not always about dramatic displays of courage, but about the small, consistent choices that protect our peace. In these quiet acts, resilience takes root. Accepting that some relationships cannot be repaired is not weakness, but clarity. We waste years believing that persistence will eventually mend what is broken, but sometimes the bravest decision is to acknowledge the truth. Strength lies in clarity, in seeing what is and not what we wish it to be. That clarity gives us the ability to create new boundaries and to choose relationships that honor our worth. Strength is not about saving every bond. It is about saving ourselves. Strength also means allowing others to witness our healing, even when we fear being judged for letting go. Society often glorifies loyalty at all costs, making release feel like betrayal. But strength is refusing to live by someone else's definition of love or commitment. It is trusting that our value does not depend on how tightly we hold, but on how wisely we choose. When others see us letting go with grace, they too learn that strength and self-respect are deeply connected. Ultimately, strength is not about what we lose, but about what we gain. By letting go of reconciliation that will never come, we create space for relationships built on trust, care, and mutual respect. We open ourselves to the possibility of joy that is not tethered to past wounds. This expansion is the true evidence of strength because it shows that we did not collapse under the weight of pain. We chose growth even when letting go felt like breaking. That choice defines strength more than anything else. Reframing the story of a broken relationship is one of the most powerful tools we have for finding peace. Instead of seeing it only as a wound that will never heal, we can begin to view it as a chapter filled with lessons. This shift in perspective does not erase the pain, but it gives meaning to the experience. Every heartbreak, betrayal, or disappointment carries within it an invitation to learn something about ourselves. By reframing the story, we take back control over how it shapes our lives. When we hold onto bitterness, the narrative often centers on what we lost or how deeply we were wronged. This version of the story keeps us stuck in victimhood, repeating the same lines over and over in our minds. But if we shift the lens, the same story can highlight the strength we discovered, the boundaries we learned to set, and the resilience we built along the way. The pain becomes evidence of our capacity to endure and grow. Reframing allows us to see the same events through a more empowering perspective. One way to reframe is by asking, what did this experience teach me about myself? The answers may be surprising. We may realize we learned the importance of self-respect, or that we discovered how to stand firm in our values. Perhaps the relationship taught us what love is not, which in turn clarified what love should be. Each painful encounter offers insight that helps shape the person we are becoming. By focusing on the lessons, we shift from being wounded to being wiser. Reframing also helps us recognize that not every relationship is meant to last a lifetime. Some connections are seasonal, arriving to teach us something specific before fading away. Instead of resenting the ending, we can learn to appreciate the role the relationship played during its time. Even painful chapters can be honored for what they revealed to us. This mindset allows us to let go without bitterness, because we no longer see the ending as pure loss. We see it as part of the natural rhythm of life. Another benefit of reframing is that it softens the way we carry memories. Instead of revisiting them only with anger or sadness, we begin to hold them with acceptance. We may even find gratitude for certain moments that once felt overshadowed by hurt. This balance prevents the relationship from being defined solely by its ending. It becomes a fuller story, one that includes both the good and the bad, and one that acknowledges growth. Such reframing can ease the heaviness of remembrance. Reframing is not about romanticizing or pretending the hurt was less than it was. It is about holding two truths at once: that we were hurt and that we also grew because of it. This dual awareness brings a sense of wholeness to the narrative. It prevents us from minimizing our pain while also preventing us from being consumed by it. We no longer deny the wound, but we also no longer let it dominate our identity. The story becomes balanced, and balance brings peace. By reframing the story, we also open ourselves to new possibilities. When we stop clinging to a version of the past where reconciliation is the only resolution, we create space for different endings. Those endings may include stronger self-trust, healthier relationships, or even unexpected joy. The way we tell our stories influences the way we live because our minds follow the paths we create with words. A reframed story gives us a path toward hope instead of despair. And with that, we step into a future no longer defined by loss. Peace is not something that arrives in a single moment and then remains untouched forever. It is a practice we return to again and again. There will be days when the old wounds feel raw, when memories resurface and anger rises unexpectedly. These moments do not mean we have failed or regressed. They are simply reminders that healing is an ongoing journey. Choosing peace requires patience because it is not a destination but a rhythm we learn to live by. Each time we choose calm over chaos, we strengthen that rhythm. Practicing peace means allowing ourselves to feel emotions without being ruled by them. When grief returns, we can sit with it rather than fight it, knowing it is part of the process. When anger flares, we can acknowledge it without letting it dictate our actions. This practice does not erase the pain, but it prevents it from controlling the direction of our lives. Peace is cultivated in those quiet choices where we refuse to let temporary feelings create permanent damage. It is in those decisions that healing deepens. Peace as a practice also means creating habits that nurture our well-being. It might look like meditation, journaling, long walks, or meaningful conversations with people who care. These small rituals build a foundation that steadies us when the waves of memory crash against us. The discipline of returning to these practices is what helps us stay grounded. Over time, they remind us that peace is not abstract. It is woven into the choices we make daily. It becomes less of a dream and more of a lived reality. There will always be triggers that reopen old wounds, and practicing peace equips us to handle them with grace. A song, a place, or even a stray comment can suddenly pull us back into the past. In those moments, we can choose how to respond, either to spiral back into bitterness or to ground ourselves in the present. Practicing peace does not mean the pain disappears, but it teaches us how to navigate it differently. We stop being defined by the trigger and instead define ourselves by our response. Another aspect of practicing peace is showing compassion to ourselves when we stumble. Some days we may feel consumed by resentment again, despite our best intentions. Rather than judging ourselves harshly, we can remember that progress is never linear. Self-compassion keeps us from giving up on peace altogether just because we had a difficult day. It invites us to begin again as many times as needed. Each return to peace strengthens the path forward, no matter how many detours we take. Peace as a practice also influences the way we engage with others. When we commit to cultivating peace within ourselves, we bring a calmer presence to our relationships. We listen more deeply, react less defensively, and show greater patience. This doesn't mean we avoid conflict, but that we handle it with steadiness instead of hostility. Practicing peace transforms not only our inner world, but also the quality of our connections. It ripples outward, shaping how we love and how we are loved in return. Perhaps the most important truth about practicing peace is that it is a choice we must continue to make. There will never be a final moment when all pain vanishes and peace is permanent. But every day gives us an opportunity to decide how we will carry our stories and how we will respond to our memories. Choosing peace daily is what turns it from an idea into a way of life. It is not a single act of triumph, but a continuous practice of courage. In that practice, we find freedom one step at a time.